If you open up a Bible to Matthew chapter 2 verses 16 to 18, you'll encounter one of the most notorious stories in any religion. Suspicious of a prophecy about a new king, Herod the Great tricks the Magi into telling him where baby Jesus was born. Then he sends his soldiers to massacre every child under the age of 2 in Bethlehem. It's a scene of shocking cruelty, one that has ensured that King Herod's name is still synonymous with evil, even to this day. But what if we told you there was more to Herod's story? Born in southern Palestine in 73 BC, Herod was a man at the center of events that has shaped history. He was there when Rome was transformed from a republic to an empire. He consorted with Julius Caesar, he befriended Mark Antony, and he submitted to the rule of Augustus. As king of Judea, he rebuilt the Second Temple, saved the Olympic Games from bankruptcy, and protected Jewish power across the world. Yet he died an unloved tyrant, hated by his people, his name forever stained with the blood of the innocent. This, in the video today, is the story of how one great man became the tyrant of all history. When Herod was born in 73 BC, it was a great time to be from a Jewish family. Roughly 100 years before, a group of priests known as the Maccabees had rebelled against the Seleucid Empire and turned Jerusalem into an independent city-state. For the first time in a long time, the Jews were beholden to no one. That no one included the superpower of the era, and that was of course the mighty Roman Republic, with whose blessing Judea kept its independence. Unfortunately for Herod, his family's Jewish roots weren't as clear-cut as he might have liked. The son of a wealthy, ambitious man known as Antipater, Herod was by birth part Edomite, part Arab. Although his father's family had been practicing Jews for a century, they were still seen as outsiders in Judea, a stigma that kept the family from holding any power. But Herod's dad, Antipater, was nothing if not ambitious, and there was no way that he was going to let his murky origins halt his family's rise. The year Herod turned 6, Antipater got his chance. In 67 BC, Alexandra Salome, the queen of Judea, died. Unfortunately, she died without leaving a clear line of succession, and her 2 sons, they elected to take their claims to the battlefield. And so began the first of a series of wars that are going to rack Judea for the rest of this video. On the one side was the queen's son, Hyrcanus II. On the other was Hyrcanus's brother, Aristobulus. Spoiler alert here, you only need to remember the Hyrcanus guy. As the war got underway, Hyrcanus came to Herod's dad to beg for his support. Antipater agreed, but not because he thought Hyrcanus was in the right. In their short meeting, Antipater realized just how weak and easy to manipulate Hyrcanus was. And, well, what could be better than having a weak, manipulatable king on the throne when he owes you a favor? By 63 BC, the war was moving decisively in Hyrcanus's favor. Besieged in the temple, Aristobulus was fast running out of options. Faced with the imminent collapse of his claim to the throne, Aristobulus decided to roll everything on one crazy gamble. At the time, the Roman general Pompey was riding around the eastern Mediterranean, conquering, well, just about everything in sight. So Aristobulus bunged the general a massive bribe to invade Judea on his behalf. This, well, it would turn out to be a rather hilariously bad move. When word arrived, Pompey moved his army on Jerusalem. Then he assessed the situation and came to the conclusion that Aristobulus was going to lose, and pocketed Aristobulus's money and sided with Hyrcanus in order to finally defeat him. Amusing as this might be, it was also a major historical turning point. In the wake of Aristobulus's defeat, Pompey annexed large parts of the once independent Judea. He then installed the victorious Hyrcanus on the throne as a Roman client king. And just like that, the era of an independent Jewish state, it came to a close. In its place began an era of Jerusalem under the heel of Rome. Not everyone was upset by this, though. For Herod's dad, Antipater, Pompey's intervention was like winning the lottery. With Hyrcanus II in charge, Antipater began happily cooperating with the new Roman authorities and establishing himself as the real power behind the throne. Not that the population of Judea made this easy. In 57 BC, an anti-Roman uprising forced Hyrcanus and Antipater to call the Roman army back in order to save their butts. This time, it was Mark Antony that answered the call. Like Pompey before him, Mark Antony subdued Jerusalem with ease. In the aftermath of the campaign, he was introduced to Antipater's now 16-year-old son. Despite being 10 years older than Herod, Mark Antony hit it off with the boy. Pretty soon, they were firm friends. It was a friendship that would soon make Herod the most powerful man in Judea. There's a peculiar curse that afflicts small states on the doorsteps of superpowers. Each time the winds of change ripple through the corridors of power, the smaller state has to hunker down in case everything it holds dear is simply blown away. In Rome in 53 BC, well, a hurricane, it was a brewing. For 7 years, the Republic had been under the sway of something called the First Triumvirate, a collection of 3 great men, all hoping to one day become the undisputed ruler. The first was Pompey, the old benefactor of Antipater and Hyrcanus II. The second was a man known as Crassus. The third, well, that was Julius Caesar. In May 53 BC, Crassus died, ending the First Triumvirate. With the third part of their trio gone, it could only be so long before Caesar and Pompey turned on one another. In January 49 BC, well, they did. The civil war that ripped its way through the Roman Republic smashed apart old certainties everywhere. In Judea, a presumably panicked Antipater and Hyrcanus were forced to choose who to throw their support behind: Pompey, the man who had given them power, or Caesar, the man Mark Antony now fought for. In the end, Antipater went for Caesar. It could have been a catastrophe, the first step along a long path that ended with victorious Pompey having Antipater's entire family crucified. Instead, though, it became the making of them. On August 9, 48 BC, Caesar annihilated Pompey's army at the Battle of Pharsalus. Broken, Pompey ran, only to be assassinated later that year. In the aftermath, you better believe old Julius did not forget who his friends were. In 47 BC, Antipater was rewarded for ditching Pompey by being made procurator, or financial governor, of Judea. Not only that, but he was given Roman citizenship, something he was able to pass on to his son. And Antipater, he had big plans for his new citizen son. That same year, 47 BC, Antipater pulled some strings and had the 26-year-old Herod made governor of Galilee. This was the first time the ancient world got a good look at the sort of ruler that Herod would be. The results, well, they were as shocking as you might be expecting. As the governor of Galilee, Herod's first task was to take care of some partisans who were hiding out in caves trying to overthrow the Roman-backed state and calling themselves new Maccabees. Everyone expected Herod to wage a conventional war. Instead, the new governor located the cave system the rebels were hiding in, sent in soldiers with the orders to massacre everyone. It was a day of bloodshed so great that it triggered riots in Jerusalem. Herod was actually hauled before the religious authorities and threatened with death for his actions. But Herod stood his ground. Before the highest priests of Judaism, he asserted his right as governor to deal with rebels as he saw fit, including wholesale murder. Despite his brutality, Herod was let off free, escaping the death penalty. It was the first major scandal that he was implicated in, but it certainly wouldn't be the last. If the people of Judea were hoping that the days of political shockwaves from Rome battering them senseless were over, well, events soon proved otherwise. Just 3 years after one civil war propelled Herod and Antipater to the top, another came along that threatened to destroy them. On March the 15th, 44 BC, Julius Caesar was assassinated in Rome by Brutus and Cassius. The deed done, the two traitors fled to the east of the Republic. Back in the Eternal City, Mark Antony and Caesar's nephew Octavian declared a new war in order to exterminate the assassins. Unfortunately for Judea, this meant once again being caught right in the middle of things. From his new power base in the east, Cassius ordered all provinces to pay for his war against Mark Antony and Octavian. That meant Judea coughing up 15,000 kilograms of silver, or its inhabitants being put to the sword. As procurator, the job of collecting money, well, that fell to Antipater. It's possible to read Antipater's willingness to cooperate with Cassius as a way of protecting Herod, but given what we know about Antipater's opportunism, it's just as easy to imagine that it flipped his loyalties once again like a weasel playing pogs. And the people of Judea, they certainly saw it as the latter. In 43 BC, one of Antipater's own tax collectors, he assassinated him. When Herod got news that his father had been killed, he flew into a rage. With permission from Cassius's forces, he tracked down the assassin and murdered him. It could easily have been Herod's last ever act of violence. In 42 BC, Mark Antony and Octavian, now formed into the second triumvirate alongside Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, defeated Cassius and Brutus. With the war over, Mark Antony went from warrior to avenging angel, riding across the provinces that had supported Cassius and leaving death and destruction in his wake. This should have been bad news for Herod, who was suddenly stuck with explaining why Antipater had leaped into bed with Cassius. But Herod had apparently picked up a trick or two from his old man. He told the avenging angel, well, of course Daddy had to support Cassius. He'd have destroyed Judea if he didn't. But I mean, honestly, bro, we always wanted you to win. You know that, right? You were always our guy. How true this was is debatable, but Mark Antony, he trusted his old friendship with Herod just enough to buy it. Rather than kill him, he made Herod Tetrarch of Galilee, its ruler. And he also made Herod's brother Tetrarch of Jerusalem. Suddenly, Hyrcanus II was reduced to a figurehead. Real power in Judea now lay in the hands of Antipater's sons. This turned out to be a pretty hard sell for Judea's population. Remember, Herod's family was seen as not really Jewish, but rather fake Jews who'd got into bed with the hated Romans. So when some dudes called the Parthians suddenly attacked in 40 BC, most Jews decided to side with them. Amid the fighting, Hyrcanus II was put in chains, had his ears sliced off, and was dragged away to captivity in Babylon. Herod's brother, the Tetrarch of Jerusalem, committed suicide rather than face the same fate. Of the three rulers of Judea, only Herod escaped. As the Parthians rampaged, he ran to the only safe place he could think of: Rome. In the Eternal City, Herod was forced to beg the Second Triumvirate for help. Mark Antony and Octavian, they listened, and they finally agreed on one condition. Herod would have to prove himself worthy by retaking Jerusalem. For the next 3 years, Herod led a Roman army against the Parthian puppet government ruling Judea. The bitter civil war, it claimed many lives, and it ruined Herod's reputation further among the Jewish population, but it worked. In 37 BC, Jerusalem fell and Herod rode into the city. Aged just 36, Herod had done it. He'd taken back what was his and proved himself worthy to his Roman clients. That same year, he had his highest honor yet bestowed upon him. No longer would Herod merely be Tetrarch of Galilee, ruling alongside another tetrarch and a figurehead like Hyrcanus. Rather, from this point on, there would only be one title befitting a warrior like Herod. He would be King of Judea. Herod's first few years on the throne were spent trying to desperately apply a veneer of legitimacy to his rule. This meant divorcing his first wife, banishing her from court, and remarrying a woman named Mariamne, who just happened to be a princess from an old ruling dynasty. It also meant begging the now defeated Parthians to send Hyrcanus II back from Babylon. This might seem like an odd choice. Hyrcanus was the only other guy around with a legitimate claim to Herod's throne. Unfortunately for Herod, though, the captured king was still popular in Judea. So Herod arranged to have Hyrcanus brought back and treated with the utmost respect, on the unspoken condition that Hyrcanus go around being all like, gee, this Herod guy, super great king, right? We should probably do what this guy says. Right, guys? Right? With this done, Herod, he went about winning over the populace. Over the next 5 years, he built massive new city walls for Jerusalem and a brand new citadel to protect the temple, named Antonia, after Mark Antony, naturally. He even had coins minted showing himself alongside traditional Jewish objects just to hammer home the point that he really was a Jewish king. But as we've already seen time and again in this video, the fate of Judean rulers, it was not decided in Judea, but rather off in Rome. And Rome, it was gearing up for yet another civil war. In 33 BC, the Second Triumvirate went the way of the First Triumvirate and unceremoniously collapsed. 2 years after that, in 31 BC, Octavian and Mark Antony decided to fight each other to the death. For Herod, this was the first time that he found himself caught between two Roman factions without Antipater around. This was a problem because Herod lacked Antipater's wily political instincts. While his father had been happy to chuck old allies like Pompey and Caesar when he thought the winds were blowing against them, Herod was just a bit too loyal to his friends. As the armies of Octavian and Antony gathered, Herod threw his lot in with Antony. And you can probably guess at this point where this is going. On September 2nd, 31 BC, Octavian demolished Antony's forces at the Battle of Actium. Antony was forced to flee into hiding, where he and Cleopatra committed suicide. At the same very time, a summons landed on Herod's desk, calling him to Rhodes to explain himself to Octavian. Now, if you've ever had to go before your boss after making some colossal mistake, you may have the faintest inkling of what Herod was feeling on that long and lonely boat ride. Unlike when he had to explain Antipaters' actions to Mark Antony, Herod had no friendship with Octavian that he could fall back on. Worse, as a guy who had literally named citadels after Antony, Herod was intimately connected to Octavian's enemy. Perhaps it says something of Herod's state of mind that his last act before leaving Judea was to execute Hyrcanus II. That way, if Herod was executed in turn, at least the throne would stay in his family. But it turns out Herod really could be as wily as Antipater. Once in Rhodes, Herod didn't even bother trying to lie. He boldly told Octavian that he had supported Mark Antony to the death, that had been loyal to the general for decades and would remain loyal even now. Octavian listened, and when Herod was done, presumably he gave him a wry smile before saying that Herod's loyalty was a far more useful asset to Rome than someone who would try and worm their way out of trouble. He then reconfirmed Herod as the king of Judea. It's pretty hard to imagine what would have been going through Herod's mind on that boat ride home. I mean, against all odds, his truth-telling gamble, it had absolutely paid off. Octavian might not exactly trust him, but he certainly respected him at least. And in Octavian's good books was exactly where the king of Judea wanted to be. Some 3 years after the meeting in Rhodes, Octavian finally completed his takeover of the Roman Republic. He took the name that history today knows him by, and that is Augustus. After half a century of bloodshed, Rome's transformation into an empire, it was finally complete. With the drama of the empire's creation out of the way, Herod was able to finally settle into actually ruling Judea. Between 27 and 20 BC, he built up an image of himself as a sort of pagan Jewish ruler, one he hoped would appeal to both Judea's population and also his Roman backers. But if neither side was ever really convinced by Herod's posing, they couldn't ignore his material achievements. As king of Judea, Herod spent his time building new stuff like Bob the Builder on cocaine. Jerusalem got a new amphitheater, market, royal palace, and a ton of new homes to replace those that were destroyed by an earthquake. New aqueducts brought fresh water into the city. On the fringes of Judea, huge new fortresses were being built to protect the kingdom. Some of these, such as Masada, are still extant and impressive. Then there was the money spent abroad shoring up Judea's image. Iconic cities like Damascus and Beirut were given Herod-sponsored makeovers. When the Olympic Games was going to go bankrupt, Herod stepped in and he saved it. This largesse was accompanied by an unmistakable increase in Judean power. Augustus twice visited Herod in Jerusalem, and each time he handed over new land to the king. In 20 BC, Judea had expanded to include swaths of modern Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. As Judea's prestige grew, those in Rome took notice. Soon Jerusalem was flooded with Roman playwrights, historians, and philosophers, all eager to see the booming city-state. And you better believe Herod tried to use this power for good. He was a vocal defender of Jews living in other states, often going out of his way to appease their Gentile hosts. But, of course, this is still Herod we're talking about here. Underneath all of this glitz and glamour lurked a dark side. On the streets, ordinary Judeans were suffering enormous tax burdens to pay for Herod's projects. On top of that, there were uneasy questions hovering over Herod's Jewishness. With his fondness for pagan Roman things, many believed in Jerusalem that their ruler was secretly trying to sabotage their culture. Not that it was all bad for ordinary men and women, though. During the horrific famine of 25 to 24 BC, it was Herod's Roman contacts that stopped the disaster by arranging huge shipments of grain to Judea. But it wasn't until 20 BC that Herod made his greatest attempt to win Jewish hearts. He decided to rebuild the Second Temple. Way back in 519 BC, the Neo-Babylonians had destroyed the First Temple. A replacement had been built, but it was definitely, let's say, modest. Under Herod, that was about to change, though. Everything you think of when you think of Jerusalem's temple was a result of Herod's construction spree. The sweeping walls, vast towers, and great courtyard covering the Temple Mount all came into being because of Herod. The famous Western Wall you can see standing today, yep, That's another Herod project. Not that this grand new temple mollified everyone. Herod kitted it out with too many Roman touches, too many architectural nods to Judea's imperial overlords. Nor did he take criticism kindly. When a small sect of radical Jews tore down a Roman eagle symbol from the new temple, Herod had them all burned alive. Still, as Herod entered the last decade of his life in 14 BC, the signs were all there that he might go down in history as not so bad a ruler. Indeed, he might even have lived up to his billing of Herod the Great. But you and I both know that there is one final act to come. One of the fascinating things about Herod is that despite still being a household name 2,000 years later, he often feels like he was only ever a bit player in two major stories. For most of his life, the story Herod appeared in was the epic novel The Rise of the Roman Empire. But as he entered old age, the king of Judea found himself cast as the villain in an even more famous tale. That's right, it's about time that we talked about Jesus. There's a bit of a debate about when Christ's birthday actually was, with it generally being agreed that it's somewhere from 6 BC to 4 BC. Whichever is true, by the time Christ was born, Herod's rule was in a very bad place. The trouble had really started in 10 BC, when Herod had waged war against the Nabateans, and so screwed up the campaign that had fallen from Augustus's favor. This sudden demolition in status seems to have triggered a crisis of paranoia in the king. Convinced supporters of the dead Hyrcanus II were plotting in the shadows, Herod began a ruthless campaign to root out suspected enemies. He'd already put his wife Mariamne to death, but now he also had her brother, mother, grandfather, and children all killed. Herod even had two of his own sons, Antipater and Aristobulus, executed. When Augustus heard, he joked it would be safer to be Herod's pet pig than one of his sons. Nor were those outside of Herod's court safe. In his last years, Herod had hundreds of ordinary Judeans thrown in dungeons and tortured. He masterminded gruesome public executions to keep order. Rumors started to swirl that he'd defiled the tombs of David and Solomon, that he'd taken 9 wives in defiance of Jewish customs. Although there were still triumphs, such as the opening of Herod's great new port city, Caesarea, in 9 BC, but they were all overshadowed by a cloud of paranoia that was hanging over Judea. It wasn't helped by a horrific illness that the king contracted that ate away at his flesh, which is thought today to be Fournier's gangrene. The disease left Herod so mad that he gave insane orders, from the mass execution of 300 soldiers to a demand that all Judean nobles be dragged to an amphitheater on his death and then shot full of arrows. It was against this dark background that a sect of Jewish scholars suddenly announced the time of the Messiah was almost upon them. And so we come to Herod's most infamous legacy. Matthew chapter 2, verse 16 to 18 tells us that Herod became worried about the prophesied Messiah, eventually ordering every child under 2 in Bethlehem to be put to death. Known as the Massacre of the Innocents, the killing is controversial among historians today because it only appears in Matthew's Gospel. The other Gospels don't mention it, nor do the accounts of Josephus or Nicholas of Damascus. Still, from what we know of Herod's mental state in his last few years, having a bunch of random babies killed would certainly have been completely in character. Thankfully, the massacre would be the last awful thing that the king of Judea ever did. In 4 BC, Herod the Great finally passed away in Jericho. This was only a handful of months after a failed suicide attempt. Traditionally, it's thought he died in March, although no one really knows for sure. After his passing, Augustus decreed Judea would be split into 3 parts. The kingdom that Herod had helped create, it was no more. In the end, the life of Herod was defined less by who he was than by those who were around him. The lives of Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, Augustus, and of course Jesus continue to fascinate us even now, 2 millennia later. To have been a part of all their stories is a remarkable achievement in itself, even if Herod may not have seen it that way. The poem Ozymandias by Percy Shelley tells us of a traveller who finds a great broken statue of some king in the middle of a desert. Now the statue's pedestal, it declares, "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." But there is nothing left of this dead king's deeds, no hints of his life, just endless sand. In the desert of history, it's tempting to think the same has come of Herod, with his name still only just about visible thanks to a single verse in a single book of the Bible. But as this video has hopefully shown, there was more to the life of Herod than one horrific act. He may not have been a good man, or even a particularly clever man, but Herod the Great was certainly one thing. He was a man worth remembering. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do give us a thumbs up below, and don't forget to subscribe. We do brand new videos just like this 4 times a week. So subscribe, hit that bell, do all of that other great stuff, and I'll see you next time.